Welcome to the Losing Grit Podcast, Raceday Rundown Edition. I'm Joe, that's Jeremy, and today's the 65th running of the Great American Race at the Daytona. That's the Daytona 500, Jeremy. We're here to cover some tidbits live for the first time, so we're excited to be here. Say hello to everyone, Jeremy.
Hello, everyone. Please write us some messages in the chat. We're here to answer some of your guys' questions. This is our first time doing live, so bear with us a little bit. But I think that this is going to be a really nice show today. A lot to kind of go over. I'm really kind of excited to kind of dive into it because Daytona is anyone's race to win. I mean, not just the drivers, but you at home. If you're doing some DraftKings or taking some wagers, now's the time to do it because anything can happen.
Yeah, and we'll be talking some of the slate strategy from a DraftKings angle. We'll also get into some optimal lineup reviews for really how we're going to build our lineups. Strategies the key, especially on these super speedway tracks. This is going to be something that we'll dive into. We're going to also talk about some head-to-head action. We love to see where we can find value across the slate. This being the opening day for the NASCAR season, there's a lot to cover. We can start talking about where everybody's starting, kind of get an idea of what we've seen so far, track action, since we have seen 2 duels, qualifying, couple practices. There's a lot of things that have taken place, but most of that really, at the end of the day, doesn't matter because super speedway action is different than everything else.
Yeah, it really is. And shout out to Alex Bowman, qualifying on the front row.
I see you got your shirt on.
Yeah, I had to, give him a little bit of support because 6 times in a row he has qualified either first or second for this race. His finishes haven't quite been there, so probably wouldn't be a DraftKings play for me, but I'm just excited. That's history right there. So that's pretty cool. Larson also right up there in the front row. When we were watching the duels, no surprise, Bowman pretty much bailed out early. No reason for him to be racy, but Larson stayed up there, and that might yield some benefit to him as the race goes on because he got more time in the draft and seeing how things go. But we'll get into all those guys here in a little bit, and obviously answering your guys' questions. But what were some of the takeaways that you had from qualifying, the duels, or is there really nothing that you can take from?
The Fords looked fast. Penske came out won with Joey Logano in the first duel. I think him, Ryan Blaney, both those guys are guys that are super speedway, legit talent. They are always in the conversation. Those two don't always work together. When we've seen Fords doing really well working together, though, really fast. I think that's something, obviously, with Eric Almirola winning the second duel, another Ford, different team over there at Stewart-Haas. I'm really excited to see if that result or how those results stack up overall because they were really fast in those sessions.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of trying to highlight the manufacturers. I was listening to Denny Hamlin's podcast this week, Actions Detrimental, and he was very insightful in saying, these cars are not like the last model cars where track position is still really important. Before you could kind of drop to the back, hang out, and you could make your way up in a couple laps if you were, a talented driver like he is at these style of tracks. Sounds like that's going to be a little harder, and I think you're going to see just as much, maybe even more manufacturer alliances because you talked about how good the Fords looked. In that first duel, in my opinion, we really didn't get a good chance to see what the Chevys would do because they kind of screwed themselves on their strategy by pitting early. The Fords, they stayed hooked up with a couple Toyotas, and they could never make up that time once the pits cycled. If that doesn't happen, I think we see the Chevys working really well together. They changed the front end on the cars to try to allow for better bumping. They're not quite so pointy, so we shouldn't see as much spinning out. But we say that, and in the second duel, we saw Daniel Suarez just beating the back bumper off of Kyle Busch and eventually turned him on a straightaway. So we'll see if they can kind of get that figured out. But I think the teams working together, that's going to be big. And Toyota only having like 7 cars in the field, they're going to have to try to either piggyback off of Chevy or Ford if we have any green flag pit cycles, because those 7 cars can't outrun a pack of 15 cars. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, and you mentioned strategy. Pit strategy is going to be part of that, like you mentioned. But strategy from a DraftKings angle is also different with these super speedway races. You mentioned Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch is going to be probably one of the highest owned drivers because stack the back is the approach that we typically recommend whenever you are doing any sort of super speedway racing, because there's absolutely no idea when you're going to see an accident on the track. Having place differential is really key and is going to be something that factors out at the end of the day, because a lot of laps led throughout the field because of this style of racing that we see. It kind of gets divvied out. The fastest laps from a DraftKings angle is another metric that you can get performance points based off of. That is something that will be spread throughout. So place differential is a big key metric at these super speedway tracks. So strategy and stacking the back, you want to explain a little bit about that, Jeremy?
Yeah, so place differential and finishing positions are what will most likely win you money or cost you money. Typically, we don't see a lot of drivers making the optimal lineup starting in the top 10. Now, if we looked at the optimal lineup from the first Daytona race last year, we actually did see 2 drivers, Blaney and Austin Cindric, both started in the top 10 and made the optimal. But let's give a little context to that. First year of the car, there was a major part shortage, supply chain issues. I think we've all had some experience with that in one shape or another. And I just don't think that the guys were quite as aggressive. They all wanted to win the 500, but they didn't really want to tear up cars because that could have literally set them back for a few weeks because they were just so short. You go to the second Daytona race, and the highest qualifying driver that made the optimal started 21st. And that's what we're typically seeing on these super speedways. Obviously, there can be a little discrepancies here and there, but that's really the approach that we've taken for a while. I know there's a lot of people out there who also take that strategy, but surprisingly, there's still a lot of people who are playing where they're maxing out their salary. They're trying to hit all the good guys. They're putting Blaney, Logano, Hamlin, all these guys that are good on super speedways, but they may not have the place differential. And, we might see one guy, if they decide to get strung out and run single file, we might see one guy really gobble up the laps led, but we're not going to see the fastest laps get taken by one driver. It's just not going to happen on a drafting track. So you really do need that place differential and the finishing positions to do well if you are playing a DraftKings slate.
And you mentioned salary. That's something that really in this style of racing doesn't matter. You typically want to get as much value as possible. That's always the key, is the value that you get with your budget. You get $50,000 over on DraftKings. Ideally, most of the race day situations, you want to be spending as much as you can, because the drivers at the front, they're usually leading a lot of laps, dominating races, getting fast laps, things of that nature. Like you said, in this style, leaving some money on the table is always probably ideal. I'm looking at the past performance for the July race. The salary was only $31,200 for the optimal lineup to produce as much points as possible. So leaving salary on the table is your friend today. That's something you can be comfortable doing. It's something that most people will be doing. The winning lineups will have a lot of lower priced, higher upside drivers with place differential, starting a little bit further back in the pack, having the opportunity to get a better finishing position. And we always have to talk about the big one in a speedway race like this. That's usually the factor that allows for this strategy to play out in the end, Jeremy.
Yeah, you mentioned the salary, the 31,000. That is a little bit of an anomaly, even for super speedway races. The first Daytona had just under 46,000, but you're still leaving 4,000 on the table. But you mentioned Kyle Busch earlier. Some of these drivers who are in really those PD spots that we're looking for, they're going to be more expensive than what would be typically like. There's plenty of times where I'll just build a lineup and just look at, okay, this guy's starting here, here, here. Okay, this equipment's decent. He probably won't have problems, and that's how you build. But now with some of these drivers getting shuffled up, I mean, we got Jimmy Johnson back in the field, starting way back there. So I don't expect the optimal lineup to be $20,000 left on the table. I'm expecting somewhere between 5,000 or less will most likely be that optimal. That's kind of the range that we typically are seeing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good information that we're talking about. The optimal lineups are something that a part of our performance sheet that we're going to be putting out every week for the NASCAR season. It's good information to be able to kind of contextualize how you approach a certain lineup construction based on some of the previous data and results. So I'm really excited for that, and I'm excited to kind of add everything up and see how it plays out. But like we were talking about, super speedway action is almost like a roll of the dice. We can talk numbers, we could talk data all day long, but at the end of the day, whenever the big one occurs, whenever there's several accidents, we've seen multiple green, white checker finishes in this kind of race. It allows for a lot of things to get shooken up. So strategy, stack the back, has seemed to work in a lot of these style of races. So that's kind of what we're recommending today. What are some of your points or any points that you want to drive home? Again, we're open for questions. We'll take them. We'll answer them here shortly. So drop a comment and we'll be getting to it here in a minute. Jeremy, any points you want to drive home?
Something I was going to get to this a little bit later, but the last little, I guess, since you kind of bring it up, I'm going to flip this. I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
So we said all the stack the back stuff.
Yep.
And we know that there's one factor that I'm curious if you'll build any lineups for this. Unfortunately, with Daytona being in Florida, weather becomes an issue. And if they make it to stage 2 in the race and they get ran out, race is official. They may try to run it on Monday, obviously, to try to get the full race in, but we have seen rain shorten super speedway races. If that's the case, obviously it all depends on when the big one happens. Typically we see the big one later in the race, in that third stage. Are you taking any stabs on possible weather and maybe trying to sneak a few one in? Obviously, it really depends on the contest that you're playing, whether you're doing single entry or tournaments and things like that. But are you willing to burn a lineup just in the off chance that the good drivers that we expect to be up front are up front because they haven't gotten taken out by that big one yet?
I looked at the weather forecast. It's like 9, 10, 15%, somewhere in there. I'm not really too worried about it. It wasn't supposed to be an issue the other night, and it was for the trucks. Yep. It is Daytona. You never know whenever Florida weather is going to sporadically pop up, but I'm not too concerned about it. It doesn't seem like it's worth really kind of wasting an entry on. Typically in years past, it might be something, and if the weather forecast said a little bit higher chance, it might be a legit stab that I would take at building a lineup that way. Not this week. I'm not going. You?
Yeah.
Are you doing it?
I'm thinking about it. Just one of those kind of. I'm just going to throw it out there and see. My main builds are obviously the stack the back approach, but I was just kind of curious if anyone else is building lineups for potential weather. And then the other thing I was also going to ask you. He doesn't fit into our stack the back model, but any chances you're going to be throwing any Austin Cindric in here? And the only reason why I'm saying this is not just because he won the 500 last year, but because last year Zane Smith won the trucks, Austin Hill won the Xfinity race, and then Cindric won the Cup race. Well, we've already hit 2 out of those 3. Zane Smith won again this year, and then Austin Hill won last night. Does that sway you at all? I know that doesn't really fit into our stats and metrics, but it is kind of a little bit of a trend. Any interest there?
I'm not going to. I saw somebody has a ticket open today from the pick and the 2 previous winners. I think they went Joey Logano in their pick, but yeah, I'm not leaning that way. He is really good at this style of racing. He is somebody that you could take a look at. We're going to get into some of the odds here in a little bit later, so stick around for that. But he is somebody that has a lot of upside. Could make it be a repeat for all 3. That'd be wild.
That would be really wild. I don't know if I put him in any lineups, but maybe I'll find a little action with him somewhere else. But just kind of something that popped up that wasn't really expecting. Wasn't that surprised that Zane Smith won. He's a great talent. Same thing with Austin Hill, but I was a little bit more surprised.
That was a wild finish,
especially when you have 4 Junior Motorsports drivers behind, and they didn't work together.
They messed that up. That was unfortunate. Junior Motorsports really fast once again, working together like Junior used to do back in the day with DEI. Those guys are always in the mix, it seems like, on super speedways, and they just completely fudged that up. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It didn't play out well. Sam Mayer ended up on his roof, and Allgaier ended up not pulling it out, and Austin Hill got that victory.
And Barry ran out of fuel.
Yeah, that's why. Right? Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah. So, but hey, it got him track position. It was just a little bit too short there for him, unfortunately. But yeah, anyway, just one of those little things. Just thought I'd bring up, just kind of see where you're at, because it's interesting. But I say we get into a little bit of the drivers. Let's talk about the slate a little bit. Well, we're not going to cover every driver here in this segment, but obviously if we skip a driver and you guys are curious about it, go ahead and ask us. But let's start at the top on the DraftKings salary board. Chase Elliott comes in at $10,400, starting 8th. DraftKings-wise, probably not going to have very much interest there, just because he doesn't have that PD upside. We already talked about the performance points. If he wins the race, he could still make the optimal, no doubt, but it's a much harder task for him to do that in that regard. But if you're looking at taking some wagers, do you have any interest in Chase in this 500?
If I were to pick him, it would be as the outright winner or in some sort of top Chevy scenario. Him on DraftKings is something, starting in the 8th position, being the highest salary driver. It's going to be hard for him to hit value.
And the most popular driver,
Absolutely.
So you know that people are going to be playing him regardless.
Yeah, the people that are not playing weekly, they'll lean towards having him a little bit higher in their lineups. He's always going to be at the top of the conversation for most money taken in on any given Sunday at the sports books. So he's somebody that's a fan favorite, carries a lot of ownership in the DraftKings scenario. So I'm going to really not have too much exposure, if any, to Chase Elliott this week, opening up the season at the Daytona 500. I've given him a 5 with my impact score. So that impact score rating, we're giving that from 1 to 10, 1 being somebody we're not really expecting to perform or contribute value-wise too much in the race, and 10 being somebody we're really excited about, somebody we want to play, somebody we want to have riding, or our money riding and the action riding on that driver. So with Chase Elliott being in the mix at a 5, I'm really not going to have much, if any, exposure to him in my lineup construction.
Yeah, I'm just a tick above you. I'm at a 5.5, basically for the same reasons. But I think the next driver to talk about is Denny Hamlin at 10,300. Highest owned driver on the slate, in your opinion?
He very well could be, but there's some guys starting in the back. I'm expecting some more ownership, especially his former teammate Kyle Busch.
Yeah, I think he's going to be up there, but I think there's a lot of people putting their money on Hamlin to win this thing outright, get his 4th Daytona 500. And, yeah, he's definitely talented enough that he could do that. And starting 18th, there's PD upside there. He could get up front and lead laps, but even if he only leads a few laps and gets some of those fastest laps, finishing top 5, he's still going to be over a 5x value, and that's what we're looking for with these optimals. I mean, if your value, which is basically the points versus the salary, if it's below 5, like, it's almost guaranteed that driver will not make the optimal. So he's in a position that he's in a nice spot, not starting too far back where, he's got to work through the traffic and really rely on wrecks to happen. So I like him a lot. I'm going to 8.5 on Denny Hamlin this week.
Yeah, and Denny Hamlin, somebody in this style of race setting, you've got to look at him as somebody to compete, because in the last couple of years' data, 2020 to 2022, so we got 1 full year of exposure in the next-gen car. He's got 6 top 5s in 12 races. So over half the time he's finishing in the top 5, which is better than anybody in the sport currently. So I really think he does have a chance to make a really big impact on this race. I'm going to go ahead and land on an 8 because there are some other drivers that you can do a lot with. He is going to have quite a bit of ownership, like you said, but I really do want to have quite a bit of exposure to him. He's going to be somebody I'm going to be leaning on heavily.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk about 2 drivers at the same time here. They're teammates. They're starting in a very similar spot, very similar price. I'd say very similar upside. Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano. Blaney's a little bit more, 10,100. Logano's 10K. Starting 7th for Blaney, 3rd for Logano. We saw Logano win the duel. We've seen one of the best ways to kind of see who's good at super speedways, even if they don't have the wins, are they in the photo at the end of the race at the start-finish line? And you go back and you're going to see quite a bit with Blaney. I'm giving them both a 7, even though they are starting further up. Those are those guys that I think if this thing gets single file and there's just one guy hitting the laps led, I think it's possibly Logano or Blaney. Where are you kind of sitting at with those? I know you're not quite as high as I am on them, but what do you have a preference, Blaney versus Logano?
Yeah, I certainly prefer Blaney over Logano based on his previous experience on super speedways. He's right behind Denny Hamlin on being able to finish in the top 5, having a consistent finish. Again, it's hard to do. There's a lot of luck involved, missing the wrecks and all the action on the track, being able to be clean on pit road. So much stuff that goes into it, but he's been able to find himself up there several times. I've given him a 6.5 because his price tag and starting position primarily is a starting position. Price tag right now, not really in the conversation with what we can do with other guys further down the list, but that starting position doesn't offer a lot of place differential. Starting 7th, it's going to be harder for Joey Logano to even reach value starting 3rd. So I'll lean Ryan Blaney. I'm not going to have a lot of exposure, but I'll sprinkle him in some larger tournament builds and hope that he doesn't carry a lot of ownership.
So next guy is, we kind of already mentioned him, Kyle Larson, starting 2nd. As the week's gone on, I mean, he's went from a hard no to maybe, but only a maybe in the sense if you're taking him outright. He's going to have to lead a lot of laps and win the race for him to be optimal because he has virtually no PD upside. So could he work out in a DraftKings lineup? Of course he could if he stays out of the wrecks and stuff like that. But I think that this is, in my opinion, the easiest fade from a DraftKings standpoint is not playing Kyle Larson. Got him all the way down at a 4, so I'm not planning on having him at all. Any interest there for you besides possibly some straight ups or even a no there?
I'm not going to be looking at him at all in the DraftKings environment. He's somebody that could certainly win the whole race, but it's very challenging to want to put any kind of associate any real value with him in the DraftKings environment just because of that second place starting position. We talked about it earlier. All the points that come from a dominator come from leading laps and the fastest laps, and those really are spread out on this kind of an event. It's very hard for me to really feel comfortable playing him in this. I will, and we'll get into it here in a little bit, look at some of his potential head-to-heads. We will probably look at some of his outrights or team combos. So we'll look at the betting angle here in a little bit, but really not feeling him this week in the DraftKings environment.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Now we're starting to get into some drivers, though, that deserve some looks because they have the talent on super speedways and just in general. They've got equipment, teams backing them that they can definitely make their way to the front. And they're starting far enough back where that PD kicks in if they're able to finish well. So kind of really starting it off is going to be William Byron, 9,700, starting 21st. He has a win at Daytona. Not a 500, but it was one of the cutoff races that actually locked him into playoff a couple years ago. He's a talent, and, I think this could be a big year for Byron. He started off the season last year really strong, then he kind of just went through this stretch where he was just honestly pretty terrible in a lot of different aspects, but going back the year before, he had some nice runs, top 10s. So I think this is going to be a big year for Byron, and I think that it could start here at the 500. So for me, William Byron's going to be an 8 on my board. I'm definitely finding ways to work him in. He's kind of right there on that edge, though. You don't really want – you kind of want outside the top 20. So starting 21st, like that's really nice. You're going to have much – action on Byron, or are you kind of saying, you know what, if he beats me, he beats me, I'm going with guys further back?
Yeah, I'm leaning more that way. I've given Byron a 7 for my impact score. I think he has that upside, he has the talent, but he's kind of just right outside no man's land, and it's going to be interesting to see if he starts to make his way up towards the front, if he lingers in the back, all that kind of stuff. I'd rather take the risk and go with somebody that has a little bit less to lose on place differential. When you get somebody that's like starting 30th, you don't have as much risk. But again, he is somebody that could legitimately come in, finish top 5, get a win. He has the ability and is capable of doing so. So I'm certainly not writing him off with that 7 on my impact score. I'm certainly going to have him in a few lineups.
Okay, alrighty. You've mentioned this guy a few times. We kind of already brought him up. If he's not the highest on driver on the slate, he probably should be, because even though he's going to a backup car because he got taken out in the duel, I expect that team to still give him something. He'll be starting back there with his teammates, so he might be able to link up with them, and they can do some drafting with some other Chevys. But of course, I'm talking about Kyle Busch. He's going to come in at 9,600 and starting 36th. I think he might actually be dropping to the rear, so technically he'll be starting 40th, but he'll be scored from 36th. All the upside in the world. Even with the wreck, I mean, when we saw him racing in the duel, it's like, okay, this RCR always seems to have a good super speedway package. They may miss at other tracks, but super speedways, they've been consistent. We've seen his teammate Austin Dillon run well, won the 500 a couple years ago. So despite having to go to a backup car, I think Kyle Busch is in a primo spot, and I would not be surprised to see him up towards the front at some point in this race. I think it'll take a little bit. We may not see it in the first stage, but I think that second stage into that third stage, I think that's where Kyle Busch will really start to we'll start to see him. Obviously, if there's any wrecks earlier, that could take him out, but that's not what I'm expecting. So we'll see what happens. But I'm going to be at a 9.5 for Kyle Busch. One of the highest rated drivers I have. I've got a few more that are up there too, but there's just not much to not like about him this week.
I agree. I landed on a 10 with my impact score for Kyle Busch this week. All the compliments and everything you just went down, that scenario of he's just primed to go off on this slate, because with him getting in that accident and starting in the rear of the field, there's just nothing but upside. At that price tag, he's going to be most likely going to be the number one driver on the slate that's going to come with ownership galore. So,
but you might just have to eat the chalk with that one.
You certainly could go against it and go straight to Jimmy Johnson at 39th, starting 39th, kind of get different and just fade him fully just in case he does get an accident. But it's not like he's going to really hurt you that bad.
Nope.
If it all shakes out horribly, because so many other cars traditionally get in these accidents, usually becomes a wash.
Yeah, I think even if there is a lot of ownership, just eat it, because you're going to need that base if he is finishing top 10. I don't think there's going to be too many other drivers that you can make up that point differential. And, we talked about there's some people playing the stack the back strategy. I'd say that's mostly, other DFS content creators. They're the ones kind of preaching that. Same with us. But we see the public doesn't necessarily go that way. So there may be a lot of Kyle Busch lineups that have a Joey Logano in there. Logano has issues, Rex out, or a Blaney, or some of these guys that in a normal race you would pair with Kyle Busch.
Like a Chase Elliott.
Yeah, like a Chase Elliott. But if those guys don't work out and you have them, it doesn't matter, because if you got other guys that are starting further back and they get that PD, you'll beat those guys. So
yeah, and somebody that has to, I think, really be in the conversation at Daytona in the super speedway is Bubba Wallace. He's a driver that has a win, and is someone that, being that he's in this position, kind of in the no man land starting position of 15th, I think he's gonna get some attention. I just don't know how much. And I kind of want to have some exposure to that. I've got an 8 with my impact score, because traditionally we do like seeing that further or starting position being a little bit further back. But in this situation with Bubba and his upside legit being a top candidate for the win, top 5 is really not too far out of the question in this style of race every single time he's racing. So somebody I'm really high on, I want to have sprinkled in throughout my lineups.
Yeah, he is in kind of that tough spot because he doesn't have a ton of PD upside, but he's got enough. If he's getting another top 5, I mean, he finished runner up. He almost won this last year, and he's been in the mix several times. So a question I had, I'm just kind of to fill you out on this. If you had a car and it was, let's just say it's like a Hendrick level car, a Penske level car. I mean, it's up there, and you could pick any driver to drive that car for just a super speedway race, whether it's Daytona or Talladega. How many drivers do you go through before you get to Bubba Wallace? Because for me, he's probably like 4th or maybe 5th on the board. I mean, he's a top 5 guy that I would want in there in these style of races, and that's leaving out some other really talented guys. But he's aggressive. He makes some crazy moves at times, but somehow it ends up working out for him. We just see him up at the front, time in, time out. Obviously, he gets caught up in wrecks just like anybody.
You mentioned aggressive. How does that in this kind of racing style? Does that work for you? Work against you? What's your perspective on that? Because that it certainly seems to be aggressiveness can cause the big one, but it can also allow you to be aggressive at the end and pull out the win.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to say because I've never driven one of these cars before, but I think I would kind of default to what Hamlin was talking about this week. And, some guys are aggressive right at the jump, and I'd rather be there at the end and make those aggressive moves. I wouldn't want to be the one trying to shove my way through people the first 2 stages. I'd want to keep my car as clean as possible and then be aggressive at the end. But that's obviously not the approach that a lot of these guys have. And I think, the strategy outside the car is one thing, but I'm sure when you get in the car and you've been following the same person, for 50 laps, you probably get tired of seeing their back bumper, and you might want to just naturally want to get around them because that's just kind of nature. I think we've all been stuck behind people on the highway, and it's like, well, they're doing the speed limit, but I'm just tired of being behind them, so I'm just going to go around them or something like that, So I think we'll see a lot of aggression in this race because we're not worried about cars and parts and stuff like that. So that's why I think looking at the second Daytona race is probably going to be a little bit more accurate to how this race will finish, where it's going to be mostly PD plays. And it'll probably lead to some big wrecks. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. But how many drivers are you taking? You didn't answer the question. How many drivers are you taking before Bubba?
Oh, there's a list of 3, 4, 5 drivers. He's certainly in that realm of top 5, like I was alluding to earlier. He's got to be in that conversation, and he's somebody that I wish he had a little bit more place differential upside, but that might garner a little bit more ownership if that was the case. So I'm hoping to find the right mix of ownership and just be able to score a couple of lineup wins with him. We were talking about aggressiveness. The next guy we're talking about is Ross Chastain, Jeremy.
Yep.
Epitomizes aggressive.
Yeah, he is aggressive, but I think he gets a little bit of a bad rep. Like he's smart behind the wheel too. Like, yeah, he might make a few, moves and that end up not working out. They end up being mistakes, but I think he is pretty calculated. But he is aggressive, and he is pretty good on super speedways. We've seen it. I mean, if we look at the optimals, let me pull this up real quick. So if we look at all 6 drafting tracks, let's call it that because I don't really consider Atlanta a super speedway, but now with the reconfig, it races this way. So there was 6 last year: 2 Daytona, 2 Talladega, 2 Atlanta. Out of those 6 races, he was in 4 optimals. And then Chase actually did make 3, which I think is noteworthy. And then you have a couple guys at 2 and then quite a bit at 1. But he just – not only did he make the most optimals overall last year, I think it was at 13. He had a heck of a year last year, but he was also doing it on these style of races. And, given that he's not priced up, not that salary matters, $9,200, but starting 23rd, he's in that window where he's starting outside the top 20. He's got the talent to do it. I think the car will be there. Didn't see that much from him out of the duels, but I think that was a little bit more of a strategy play. Just try to get a good finish if it's there, and he was there at the end. But looking at his teammate Suarez before he got in the issue with Kyle Busch, like he was right up there at the front. So I think Trackhouse is going to be strong in this race, which lends itself to being good for Ross Chastain. And I'm giving him an 8.5.
Yeah, I've laid out on 8.5 for pretty much everything you just said. You covered that really well because those are a lot of the primary reasons I'm really enjoying having Ross Chastain in quite a few of my lineups. He's 23rd, pretty solid upside for someone that we expect a lot from this year. That could weigh on him, though. He used to, in the DraftKings environment, especially early on last season, lower price tag. That helped out tremendously when you were able to factor him into the optimal lineups. But now he's somebody that's going to be part of the conversation every Sunday like he was towards the end of the season last year. I'm looking forward to Ross Chastain this year and seeing what he what kind of show he can put on for us in 2023. But, yeah, I landed with the 8.5 on him. Somebody I'm pretty excited to talk about, very similar kind of situation as what we just talked about with Ross Chastain, is Tyler Reddick. New team, though, but he's somebody that's aggressive. The right mix, has a lot of upside with having where's he starting? 26th?
Yes.
So he is going to have that nice combo that we're looking for with place differential. Price tag's not really something that we're too concerned out with this week. I've got him at a 9 because having a couple different spots in PD is going to be a little bit of a game changer in my position, but not too much. I want to have both these guys, though, in quite a few lineups. How are you leaning on Tyler Reddick this week?
You know, I'm really I'm really not sure what to expect from Tyler Reddick this year. You know, he finally had his breakout year last year. Got 3 wins. But for some reason, I hope I'm wrong on this because I want to see him do well, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him take a little bit of a step back going to this new team. Now, long term, I love his long-term trajectory, but just with the new team and everything, I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out. But for this race and for, from the perspective of DraftKings, you got to have some interest into Tyler Reddick because, starting 26th, he doesn't, even if he gets into some trouble, and finishes around where he starts, he's not killing you. You're not going to be the optimal, obviously, but you can still get some of your money back. So you got to have some interest. I mean, I'm right there with you. I'm at a 9 with him, but I think I'm curious if other people like in the main slate, if they're going to be high on Reddick or if he's going to be very low owned. So he might be a really good play just because he gets that top 15, top 10 finish, which he's capable of doing. He's got skills on this style of track too. He might be a fairly low owned play because he's kind of sandwiched with, right there, that Ross Chastain, and then there's some other PDs, we're the next guy we're going to talk about, he's kind of in this land where I think other people might just pass over him to put some better PD plays in. So I like him, but I am curious from the season-long perspective how well he does this year. I don't see him winning 3 races again. So if you got a bet for that, at 3.5 or 2.5, I'd probably would take the under, but we'll see.
Well, we're going to go skip a couple drivers and get down the list to talk about Austin Dillon. If you have any questions, don't forget you can drop them in the comments. We're looking to drop it in the chat. We're really wanting to have the engagement. If you have any questions about drivers coming up on the list, we'll get to them shortly. So make sure you drop your questions in the chat, and we'll circle back around to them here shortly and get those answered. But dropping down the list a little bit, we're going to talk about Austin Dillon. He's somebody that's always part of the conversations at the Super Speedways, Jeremy. He's really the epitome of somebody that you could look to this week and have throughout your lineups because he's starting 27th. He's got that right combination of place differential. We need that this week, and he's going to be somebody, a previous winner. A lot of things going for him, and I'm going to have quite a bit of ownership with him, landing on a 9.5 with my impact score this week.
Yeah, I'm going to be at a 9, so like him a lot, just a little bit less than you. He's another one of those guys that I wouldn't say he's in that upper echelon of super speedway drivers that we were kind of talking about, but he's close. He's real close. He's, smart, real crafty at these types of tracks. And I think we'll see him up towards the front. Obviously the biggest concern there is getting into some, probably not him wrecking, but getting into other people's messing up his day. But because of the PD that we've been talking about, there's not as much downside as taking a Blaney or a Logano. So you're going to have some Dillon. If you're building, 20 lineups or so, if you don't have any Dillon, you're really gambling because he's a guy that can finish top 5 easily here. And obviously he can win too. So I agree. I think Dillon's a fabulous play. I think this guy, the next guy I want to talk about, he's going to get ownership because of who he is, but he's also going to get ownership because of where he's starting. That's Jimmy Johnson, starting 39th, excuse me. I mean, 9.5 for me. I don't, what do you really need to say about Jimmy? 7-time champion. He's won this race already twice. Obviously, I'm not expecting him to win. First time back in a Cup car in like 2 years. About 2 years. I don't know. You got the interest there in Jimmy. You fading him because of the chalk. What do you think from him? Because I think he's a lock.
He's almost as sure of a thing as you can look for. Obviously, it will come with a lot of ownership. You can always fade the chalk if you would like. I've got him at a 9.5 with my impact score. Again, our DK impact ratings go from 1 to 10, 1 being on the low end, not having much value in our eyes this week, and 10 being let's have a lot of exposure to this guy because he's probably going to have a large impact on the race. And with Jimmy landing at a 9.5 for me, I think he has the legit upside that we're looking for. Place differential, you can't do much better than that. Starting 39th, I like him. I'm going to be hammering home and pretty much a sure thing for me this week.
Yeah, I think another guy that's as close to a sure thing as Jimmy, I put him a little bit of a notch below, even though I gave him the same impact score. Chase Briscoe, starting 30th, 7,400. I think he's kind of in a weird spot salary-wise. So he's not a big name, so I don't think that he's going to get a ton of looks. He'll obviously be owned with that starting position, but probably going to go lower owned than he should. He qualified well. I think he qualified top 5, and at some point in his dual race, I think he got shuffled out and lost the draft. So that's why he's starting back here. It's not because of his car being slow. He's another guy that you can kind of, he's going to be aggressive, but he's, going to be pretty smart. I mean, he's really took a nice step forward last year from his rookie season. I think this could be another pretty solid year for Briscoe. I wouldn't necessarily call him to win, but I think with this starting position in DraftKings, you gotta be looking at him because he's solid.
Yeah, and in the Daytona Dega data that we have, so looking at Talladega and Daytona, he's got 8 starts at the Cup level. He's finished in the top 15 4 times, over half that time. If he does that this week, say he finishes 16th, we're looking at almost 6x value for his starting position. And if he does any better than that, we're just looking at more delicious stats and more points. So I really do like him. I've got him at a 9 with my impact score this week. Really do want to have some Chase Briscoe exposure. Jeremy brought up a great point. I think he's going to be lacking a little bit on the ownership. I don't think people are going to be as on him as some of the drivers a little bit lower on this list. So, yeah, looking at that's where I'm landing. 9.
Yeah, he's going to be a good play. I think the next guy, Eric Jones, starting 25th at 6,600. I think that's, now we're getting in that range where you're picking guys that does open up the slate for getting guys like Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, and still getting them in comfortably. I'm going to give Eric Jones an 8. I'd be a little higher, but I'd like a little bit more PD. But shoot, starting there, given his salary, if let's say he gets kind of his average over the last couple years at super speedways around 15th, he's already at 6x, so he doesn't need to do a whole lot. And going to those stats that you were referencing just a minute ago, over the last 12 races on Dega and Daytona, he's got 5 top 10s. Like, this dude can definitely get it done at super speedways as well. I'm going to have interest in Eric Jones. Like I said, I'd like to have a little bit more PD, but, possibly going him versus and getting a little lower ownership might be the move because he's going to be kind of like that Briscoe. I don't think he's going to get a ton of looks. We're going to see guys going to the Jimmy Johnsons and some of these guys that we're about to talk about next. So I like Eric Jones quite a bit.
Yeah, and he starts further back at 25th than what the average position is in the optimals. Typically, we're looking for somebody in this kind of range. This is really where that stack the back approach, 25th, a little bit further on back, that's where this discussion really
he's in the
started.
Sweet spot.
He really is. So I think having some solid exposure to him is a legit conversation, and I've got him at an 8.5 with my impact score because I think you can be a little bit different. He's shown before he's really prolific at this kind of racing. He even got a win last year in this style of car. I'm really excited to see if we can find some value with him this week.
Yeah, and then just the whole – I mean, he's teammates with Jimmy Johnson this week, and then obviously Noah Gregson's coming up too. So Legacy Motor Club, what can we expect from them this year? That's going to be fun to kind of watch how this plays out because I like both those drivers, Eric Jones and Noah Gregson. He's going to be solid. So let's jump down a few more. Let's just kind of quickly touch on these guys. there's not a ton of things data to really reference. I mean, we could obviously really get down into it, but these are just PD plays and just kind of looking at, just the equipment and whatnot. Let's talk quickly about AJ Allmendinger starting 29th, 6,100. I like him a lot. And I also like I'm going to skip one guy. I'm going to talk about these guys at the same time. Justin Haley, his teammate, starting 28th. We've seen these guys work together in Xfinity really, really well. Now, they had 3 cars in the Xfinity race. They only got 2, but I think they can find some other Chevys. I would not be surprised if Dinger and Justin Haley find their way inside the top 20 at a few different times during this race. Now, can they avoid the big one? That's always the big question. But I'm going to be very high on Dinger. I'm giving him a 9, and I'm going to give Justin Haley, his teammate, a 10 because he's even in Cup cars, he's had some really strong finishes.
He's a previous Daytona winner.
Yeah, I don't count that as much just because it was rain/lightning delay.
He did win.
But he won, not taking anything away. And he was in a way worse car for that race than he is in this one. And I think he's a much better racer now than he was then. So there's a lot of upside for both of those guys. And, who knows, if we do get some weather, maybe he pulls that rabbit out of the hat again and gets another victory. But I like both of those guys.
I like those two running as teammates. They're really good together. They've had success together.
It brings up a point. We probably should have talked about this a little bit earlier on. As you are constructing your lineups, are you just looking at kind of PD and driver, or are you also trying to build off of manufacturers? Are you trying to stack some Chevys together, Toyotas together, Fords together? Are you kind of looking at it that deeply, or are you just saying, no, I think these guys are in the best spots, I don't care who they drive
I
for?
certainly do have some team combos and manufacturer combos, or a mix of the both, because you can see a Bubba Wallace running well with the Martin Truex or something along those lines, having a Toyota connection. So I certainly do have some of my lineups constructed that way, and I think it's something I've had success with before on super speedway tracks. So I certainly will. Are you leaning in any?
Yeah, I'm going to have some lineups, I think, with both Dinger and Haley together, and just saying that they're working together, and then sprinkling in some other Chevys with them, of course. So I probably won't go super deep, but I think that's something, like, if you're building lineups, like, consider that, because it's not that surprising. I mean, look at some of the duels. Like, it was all Fords up towards the front. They may battle it out with each other at the very last bit, but if they're all kind of in the top 5, it doesn't really matter too much if they're all in your lineup. So I think it's worth looking at too. And if it is somewhat manufacturer working together, I think a guy we need to at least mention briefly is Ty Gibbs. If he was starting further up, I probably wouldn't have much interest, but he's starting 33rd. He's going to be in good equipment, obviously, with Joe Gibbs Racing. If he can find some other Toyotas to work with, he's no slouch on super speedways. I think a top 10 might be a little bit of a stretch unless it's just mayhem out there. But getting a top 20 or even a top 15 for Ty Gibbs is certainly in play. And if he does that with his salary and starting position, he's going to be on it.
I'm certainly going to have some exposure to him. He's somebody as a rookie, but he's had previous experience in this car, which is going to be telling whenever he gets in there. He's going to have more of an understanding than he would have if he just came directly from Xfinity Series into this ride. But having exposure last year, him and Gregson both having that opportunity to get experience at the Cup level last year will help them. Being that he's starting 33rd, prime opportunity to ride the wave towards the front, be able to cash in that place differential if we see some accidents. But him being a Toyota driver at Joe Gibbs Racing, that equipment has been fast. I expect him to be part of the conversation at some point if he's able to keep it clean, because he is a rookie. It's not going to be that he's logged a lot of hours on this style of racing, so it isn't without risk. But with that 33rd place starting position, I'm a lot more comfortable playing him. 9.5 is what I'm giving him at my impact score.
Yeah, and looking at his super speedway races, he had 2 last year. Average finish was 25th. So that's not impressive. And his PD, he was starting better, 16th in the half for his average. So those numbers aren't great. You look at his actual season numbers, all the races that he ran last year, those also weren't really that impressive. He had a couple good qualifying runs, but I must say he really can only go up from where he performed last year. Not that anyone was really expecting too much. I think there was some hype because of how dominant he was so quickly in Xfinity. But this really might be a very humbling season for Ty Gibbs. Not just excluding Daytona, because he could still get a good finish, still make your winning lineups. But this year, it would be very interesting to watch how he does full time, because his numbers last year are certainly not great, to say the least.
And that was just being able to step in for Kurt Busch, being able to take that ride on part-time. It's not easy to do for someone that young, but he's now got his own ride. He's got the 54. He's got no string. He can pedal to the metal. We'll see how it goes, but ultimately, I don't have the highest of expectations this year. Great opportunity for him to learn and roll in. We'll ultimately see.
So there's a few drivers left that we want to quickly touch on, and then we can start getting into some questions. I think all these guys are fine plays given where they're starting from. They are plays based on the big one happening. If there's not any real big ones and only a few wrecks, and it stays pretty clean, they probably are going to kill your lineup. But we get some big ones, I think these guys will be in there. So the first guy I'll talk about is, outside of possibly Jimmy Johnson coming back and just the excitement to see what he does, I've been a fan of this guy since I was just, whenever he busts on the scene, however old I was, 8, 9, 10, something like that, I've been a fan of him, and that's Travis Pastrana. I remember him doing backflips, being one of the first guys to do backflips in the X Games, and just all the crazy stuff he's done with, on cars. I mean, this dude is a maniac, and he's done so far this week in the Cup car. He's done pretty good. He got in a little bit of an accident, but that was trying to dodge Kyle Busch, so I'm not going to put too much on him for that. But he's the kind of guy, if he's in a position late to make some moves, he's going to put on a show. He's not going to be afraid to do something with that car that these other guys he is like a Ross Chastain. Ross Chastain thinks outside the box. We saw him try to cut the course at Indy. I still think that probably should have stood up based on how the rules were written. And then obviously getting into the championship race with the Hell Melon move. That's the type of guy Pastrana is. He's going to think outside the box. He's going to do things that other drivers probably wouldn't do. So if he's clean, doesn't get in anyone's messes, starting 40th, he can't get you negative points. I mean, Pastrana, it feels weird to say, but I think he's going to be in quite a few of my lineups just because of those reasons. And it's just going to be fun to watch what he can do. Yeah,
it's going to be fun to watch, and I certainly want to have exposure, being that he really can't lose you any points. But he's in a third car for 23XI Racing. I think that's an upside compared to some of the other charters that we've seen, other open cars that have qualified. Gives him a little bit of an advantage out of the mix. But I don't know if he's got the knowledge and the experience in this style of racing to be able to keep it clean the entire race. And then whenever he is at the end, hopefully if he's still there, he's learned enough throughout the previous 400 miles to make a move and make things interesting. But he certainly has to be in the conversation. After what we've seen several years of doing this, the stack the back approach, starting 40th, I've got to play him. I've got it. I've got him.
If he's starting 20th, no.
Yeah.
I wouldn't take the risk on it. I'd love to see him do well, but I'm not going to risk a lineup on that. But starting 40th, no negative points, and I mean, legit.
If he keeps it clean, oh my goodness.
If he keeps it clean and doesn't get caught in the big one, he could easily finish like 20th, just because, and that's going to be a monster day for you.
Even a top 30 is going to be over 5x value. So if we lose 12 cars in this race, he's already 5x's value just from starting 40th. So he certainly has to be in the conversation, in my opinion. I've landed on a 9. Definitely interesting. I'm excited to have him involved.
Yeah, 9.5 for me. And then just to drop a couple names that will be in my lineups. I don't think I'm going to get too much Connor Daly. That car's had a lot of issues kind of just getting on the track.
That's the Money Team 50 car, and it's been how you can tell from the beginning.
But starting 34th, that's in the stack-to-back playbook right there, so you can. For me, probably not. Ty Dillon, definitely. This guy, I mean, he's not going to be in great equipment, but I think that actually works out better. When we've seen him when he's not been in the best of equipment, he can't make some of the moves that the other guys do, so he's just kind of I'll let these guys wreck and I'll pass them when they're on the hook. So Ty Dillon, definite yes. I'm on a 9 there. And then the last two was Cody Ware and BJ McLeod, which is guys I would never play in a normal race. But we've seen these guys get top 20s, top 15s just because there's so much mayhem and their cars are still on the track. So they definitely have to be in there. I'm at I'm over an 8 on both of those guys.
Yeah, I certainly think that everybody you just mentioned, Ty Dillon, Riley Herbst even is someone I would have in the mix because of his starting position stack to back. These guys, as long as they can survive the carnage, it's going to be something that they might potentially find themselves in the conversation. So Ty Dillon, Riley Herbst, Cody Ware, BJ McLeod, those guys I really think have to be at least sprinkled in, and some of them could be key building blocks in your lineup construction. I think it's certainly going to be a weird scenario and sight to see some of these guys in the final lineups that are taking home money, but it's kind of the normal in this kind of racing, Jeremy.
Yeah, I pretty much hate most of the lineups that I've built just because if it was a normal race, I would never have those guys in there. But we know the strategy. That's what I'm rolling with, so I gotta like them. All right, let's check in with the chat. Let's see if we got any questions. James, are there any questions that have come up?
Yeah, absolutely. We got 2 people that have been watching the whole show, been commenting a lot, and let's answer a few of their questions. Let's see here. All right. Sorry about that. I was muted. Anyway, we got a couple questions from 2 commenters. Let's see here. JJT12380. He's saying he played Austin Hill in Xfinity yesterday. He won. And can I play Kyle Larson and actually still be possibly optimal?
Well, I think we kind of covered that. Not sure exactly when that question came in, but
Early on.
It is possible. And if you just have a feeling like Larson can win, you can definitely do it. But he's going to need to get those laps led to really make it optimal. Let me look at, let's see if we can get some answers here. So, we saw, Cindric, he started 5th. He finished 1st. He was in the optimal. But I don't have all the performance points on this sheet. So, yes, I would say yes, it is possible, but I would say the likelihood is probably less than 10%. You feel any different about that?
No, I don't. I think it's tempting to want to do that, but at the same time, it's going to be challenging for him, like I was alluding to earlier, is just being able to rack up the performance points, what people call dominator points, which are laps led and fastest laps, because in this style of track. And then whenever we're doing that, all of the fastest laps seem to be spread out amongst all the drivers. So you can only typically rely on 5, 6 fastest laps, which are very, very few performance points. So I don't see the path for him to get there. I'm going to go ahead and say you can do it. Just don't really rely on that being your one lineup to cash.
I think if you just want to have action on Kyle Larson, I think if you're in a state that allows you to place any wagers or whatnot, I think that's where I would go with Kyle Larson. Maybe finding some head-to-heads or something along that way if you just want to have exposure to Larson. But from a DraftKings angle, yes, mathematically he can, but his path to that optimal value is much less likely than the approach that we've been talking about all morning.
Okay, let's do these. Keep doing these questions in order. Next up is: do you hand build or use lineup optimizers? Same question. Same guy. JJT12380.
That is a great question. I'd say the answer is actually yes to both. But I don't use optimizers for super speedway racing. I don't even really like doing projections for super speedway racing because personally, I don't feel like it really showcases that much. Now, figuring out the PD and finishing position, that's key. But typically, you're looking for the performance points. And when you're on a drafting track, they're so spread out throughout the field because, a guy who's, running 10th gets a nice run and he gets that fastest lap, takes it away from the leader. So usually super speedways, I'll just hand build what I'm going to do. And I like hand building regardless, even for a regular race. But if I'm going to be putting in, 20 entries or more, yeah, I'm going to use an optimizer on most tracks, but not super speedways because the optimizer is going to try to optimize. And the guys who are normally optimal are not going to want to fit in unless you just give them a ridiculous amount of points. So, it's not going to want to put in a BJ McLeod or Cody Ware. Or if it does, it's going to try to jam in Logano and Blaney and stuff like that, which might not be optimal. So it's kind of, what you want to do. If you want to use an optimizer and then hand tweak them, that's another route that I've done before and you can certainly do. But, no optimizers for me this week.
Yeah, I'm kind of along the same kind of mindset whenever it comes to this style of racing and using optimizers. I like to do the hand build style, and it just gives me a little bit more of an advantage. But certainly if I'm doing a normal week and I'm entering typically more than 15, 20 lineups, I'll certainly use an optimizer and do some generators and just be able to mentally look at more options so I get a better idea. I have before put in tried to use an optimizer in this scenario just to kind of think differently about the slate, and I've never really done that well in that scenario. So I like to do the hand build approach, and I usually play a lot lighter in these kind of weeks because super speedway action is so unpredictable. It's hard to rely on data, and so many people are using a lot of the different strategies. So I usually tend to go light. So I don't really need the optimizer or generator or any of that kind of stuff on this, and I really like to sit back and enjoy the race and and take it all in.
Now, I will say, if you're planning on doing 150 lineups,
it certainly would.
You probably
help.
You would probably want to eliminate, just X out the drivers that you don't want at all. Try to whittle it down to the ones you do, but you're still going to need to do some hand tweaking to get the exposure just right to hit that. I don't play 150 lineups, and I certainly don't do it at super speedways. Maybe that's what I should do. But yeah, for me, I'm not going to use an optimizer. Now, something that we did build this off season that we're including in our performance sheets each and every week. It'll be interesting to see how valuable this tool is this week. I think it's going to be very valuable when we get to a more traditional track. We have a little head-to-head tool in there, and it is attached to our projections that we put out. So you can kind of visually see, okay, let's compare Denny Hamlin and Chase Elliott this week. So they're basically the same price, $10,300 for Hamlin, $10,400 for Elliott. Starting 8th for Elliott, 18th. So we look at this. Let's say we give Hamlin a 4th place finish, which is certain. That's on the upper end for sure, but we know he can win this race. And let's say Elliott has a good day, but ends up finishing where he starts. Well, at the very bottom, it'll show you the projected DraftKings points and the value. And when you start clicking around some of these, you'll see some that have more DK points, but the other driver might actually have better value. Again, we're not worried about salary as much this week, but as we get into a more traditional racetrack where we are trying to get closer to that maxing out the salary, this little tool I think will be very helpful for people, so that way you can get in there and just say, okay, man, I'm really torn between Logano and Blaney. Let's just see how it looks out. There's a second head-to-head tool in there that I kind of set up for you to edit yourself, put in your own numbers where you won't mess up any of the projections, so you can kind of flip back and forth to see, okay, this is what the losing grip guys have, but here's what I got. So, you want to go in here and say, no, what does Elliott do if he wins? Well, it'll recalculate that for you, so you can kind of have that. So, because I've noticed a lot of times throughout the years, I know the kind of the 4 or 5 guys that I really want to build, especially if it's like a single entry, but it's like, oh, do I want to go, what does this driver need to do to really hit value? And sometimes it's like, dang, that guy's got to do a lot. I don't like him as much. Or, wow, that guy didn't have to do almost anything. He just needs to finish the race, and he's going to be, golden. So, again, that is in our performance sheet. You can find that on our website, losinggripodcast.com. Go ahead and sign up. Get 2 free weeks trials. So if you don't like what we have to offer, you cancel. No big deal. But I think this is going to be a very helpful tool throughout the year. And, of course, I'll be working on tweaking it, making it better throughout the year. Like I said, not expecting too much for this race, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, and continue to drop questions in the comments. We certainly want to get to them. James, do you have any more questions for us at this point?
Oh, yeah, there's plenty here. So if y'all want to just keep answering one by one, we'll just keep going down the list. JZ_gaming comment left in the chat, I'd fade Larson. That's what his opinion. Next is a active commenter, Steve Sant. Betting on weather is like betting on blowouts in the NBA. Good luck. Rowdy will be the highest owned, he commented. And JJ's going to pull a lot of ownership. That's what he was saying.
I would agree.
And then back to JJT12380. If you're trying to take down a GPP, you're going to have to be different. Stacking the back like everyone else will get you tied with 200 of your friends.
It's true. That's one of the things we were trying to give a couple drivers that are kind of in that no man's land that we really do like and have some really good data on. So there are some ways to be different, and that's certainly trying to find those select few drivers that offer the right mix of place differential, also having the ability to survive the big one. All of that stuff is going to factor in, but there are going to be a lot of people stacking the back, and it is something where there are certainly enough drivers that we've talked about that I think can allow you to be a little bit different.
I think once the contest locks and you look at ownership, I think you'll be surprised how high some of the ownership is on some of these guys. That probably shouldn't be that high. Obviously, it's Daytona. Anything can work out. Like I said, any one of these drivers legitimately could win because so many different things could happen. A wreck could happen in lap 15 and take out the top 20 that's starting right there, or a wreck happens at 20th and takes all those guys out. So many different things can happen in this race, but I think you'll be a little bit surprised how high some of these high starting guys like Larson, I think, will have quite a bit of ownership. Not the highest. He's not going to be that high, but you'll probably be like, wow, 12%, 15% of lineups have Larson. Like, I wouldn't be surprised to see some numbers like that. That's a lot of lineups if you're, in that big contest. I think you'll see quite a few like that. I think you'll see some Bowman. I would expect less with Bowman, but I think you're going to see some because, again, you're going to get a lot of new public playing this because, DraftKings is offering a lot of, promotions around this. I think you enter 5 lineups in the $25 Millie Maker, you're getting 10,000 crowns. So there's going to be people who are just going to be doing that just for the heck of it. They're going to be looking at it and be like, well, I know this name, I'm going to go with him. And they may not have much of these guys starting in the back because they don't know that much about racing. Now, as we get further along in the season and we're doing a maybe not as big of a race, then those guys won't have that same ownership. But it's the Daytona 500. We see it every year. Guys that mathematically have a very, very long shot to make the optimal are still drafted.
And like we talked about earlier, don't be afraid to leave salary on the table. Don't be afraid to take drivers that you normally wouldn't or make combinations you typically wouldn't because you never know who's going to get involved in the accident and who's going to be left at the end. So this is a week to kind of be different for sure. James, anything else coming across?
Did you already comment on Keselowski? Your
No, we did
him?
not. Keselowski, he's going to be starting 10th, 8,800. This is a very interesting spot because there's a little PD upside, and if we're just talking all-time great super speedway racers, you gotta at least mention Brad's name in the conversation. I mean, he's legit. I forget how many wins he's up to between Daytona and Talladega. Talladega seems to be a little bit more his track. He's in a position where he will probably be fairly low owned, and he has some upside. He's in a Ford. Fords have looked pretty good. For me, I'm not going to give him a very high impact score just because there's not that much PD, and he is one of those aggressive drivers. I mean, we saw it 2 years ago. Logano was leading, he's second, and then he ends up taking them both out. So it's like, man, they were right there, potentially going to win, and his aggression just got the better of him, and then McDowell ends up winning that race. And that's kind of a similar situation how I see this race going. It's just like he doesn't have that PD upside, and he's got a lot of negative PD potential. So for me, I don't think I'm going to have any exposure to Brad, but I can certainly see why someone would want to play him because he is a very talented driver on this style of track.
Yeah, he's somebody if I was building 150 lineups, I would want him in a handful of them because he certainly can find his way around this style of track. He's had great success doing so. We saw him win last year at the duels. He can get it done. It's just unfortunate that he's starting in the top 10. I think that's the ultimate downside, not having as much place differential to gain. But if you want to take a risk, he's certainly somebody there that will go less owned than a lot of the drivers we talked about earlier. So he could pay off. Again, if I was building 150 lineups, I would have more exposure to him than I would traditionally have. So this week, since I'm not doing 150 lineups, I don't have him, but he's perfect for, like JJT said earlier, he could be one of those guys that finds himself in the optimal, or he could find himself in a similar situation where allows you to be different.
He's in that kind of Austin Cindric situation last year, or like that Blaney last year, where they're up front. He might get some nice laps led, and he's not expensive, so it's not like you're sacrificing too much to get him. Just the strategy that I'm planning on implementing, it makes it hard for me to want to play him. But if you're trying to run a flip strategy on that, where you don't want to stack the back as much and you want to take a stab at some of these guys who are starting in the top 10. Like I said, last Daytona 500, 2 guys starting in the top 10 made the optimal. That doesn't normally happen at here. I mean, Daytona 2, the highest starting driver was Austin Dillon at 21st. That's what we kind of expect this race to go. But it's it's super speedway racing. We just don't know how the wrecks are going to play out. So Brad is definitely not a bad play. He just doesn't fit the strategy that I'm attacking this slate with. Any other questions?
Thoughts on Allmendinger?
Yeah, okay. Talked about him a little bit. I like him a lot. I'm not going to be putting him in 100% of my lineups because there are times where he's in great positions and he just doesn't quite do enough. But I think him starting next to his teammate, I think that they're going to have a nice strategy to try to work their way to the front. And if they can avoid the wrecks, I like Dinger a lot. He does fit that PD that we're looking for. So very, very high on Allmendinger. And I gave him a 9 for my impact score.
Yeah, I landed on a 9 as well. I think we covered some of that, and ditto for what you just said. Him with his teammate there, very similar plays. Think you could look at both of them or either one of them and feel comfortable this week.
What else we got, James?
They're wanting to know if y'all are doing any prize pick plays.
No prize picks plays. We'll see how the rest of the season goes, but we've been working very hard on the background trying to get a lot of this stuff up and going this year. So just honestly didn't have time to really look at prize picks. You can certainly look at our projections and compare those, see what we have to what prize picks has. You might find a line that you really like on the main projections. You can see exactly the finish that we're giving them, the laps led, fastest laps. So you can kind of go in there. Like I said, you can tweak it a little bit and see if it hits that like over under number that Prize Picks has, or if you're going for fantasy points. I mean, I haven't looked in Prize Picks at all this year, so I don't know if they've tweaked it. So I don't want to give out any wrong information, but you can certainly use the numbers that they have versus our projections. And if you see something you like, hammer it, but no official picks from us for this race.
And you can check out that performance sheet and reference those official projections and all the other data that we've talked about. LosingGripPodcast.com. Go check it out. And keep on asking us questions. We've got some more time here to get through it. And we're also going to give some head-to-head picks that we've kind of gone over before we sat down here today. Some of the bets that we liked earlier on, and we can kind of flow into that. So make sure you drop us a comment or a question, and we'll get to it here shortly. If anything comes up when we're talking, just ask away. Jeremy, going to the head-to-heads, this is something that is really going to be fun throughout the season. This is always interesting to kind of see who they've got pitted against each other. This week, we found a couple that we like, and I think starting off with the Joey Logano, Kyle Larson head-to-head is where we're going to start the action. Where are you leaning on this, Jeremy? Because this is where you can find some plus money on Kyle Larson. You don't always see that, but this week is Daytona.
Well, the line shifted. When I first saw the head-to-head, Logano and Larson were both at minus 115. So basically, you had to throw $115 down to get $100 back. But,
or $1 if you're a low
well, I'm just
like,
saying how the numbers work for people so they can kind of understand why it's 115 or 130 or whatever. That's basically how it works out. Anyway, early in the week when they were even, it was I would hammer the Logano over Larson all day. Wouldn't even really think about it, knowing that anything can happen in this race, and Larson certainly could beat him. But if we're just looking at just how good they are on these styles of tracks, Logano is, like, in my opinion, way better than Larson over the course of his career. But now the line's shifted. Now it's minus 130 to take Logano and even money. So you throw $5 down on Kyle Larson, you get $5 back. Throw $100 down, you get $100 back. So now that kind of makes it a little bit more difficult. I still think head to head, I would rather have Logano over Larson, though. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's going to be it's always fun to see these numbers shift. Watching it and getting in early in the week is the key to do it, because by the time we get to race action, we've already seen qualifying, we've already seen any practice that's taken place, so the books will adjust. So it's always wise to go out there and take a look at what books are available. Depending on your state, you have more options than others. So there are even online ones that you can take advantage of, like Bet Online, Bovada, but some of the big ones like FanDuel and DraftKings and BetMGM. Make sure you're going around looking and seeing if you can find better opportunities to find some of these same head-to-head placements, because they do change throughout the week. Starting second, I think plus 100 isn't the worst on Kyle Larson versus Joey Logano, because those two guys are going to be part of the conversation at some point. And if I can get pretty much money on Larson, I think I lean that way a little bit more. A little earlier in the week between those two, I might have leaned Larson, but now looking a little bit stronger for the case on Kyle Larson.
Yeah. Okay. So, just for the money and everything, yeah, I think Larson is definitely more in play. But I think just head to head, I would personally rather have Logano. But that's what makes it fun, and that's why they call it gambling.
And that could be where we had the question earlier. Playing Larson in a DraftKings lineup might not be the answer, but going and putting it where it's even money on him just against Joey Logano, you can double your money that way. So that's a way to try to find value. If you're high on a certain driver a certain week, try to find a different way to potentially play rather than just DraftKings. It is fun to be able to have an opportunity to win a large amount of money, but you have to rely on 5 other drivers in a DraftKings scenario, when here you can just go ahead and double your money, one driver versus another, and just move on to the next week.
Yep. And another driver versus one driver that we saw a lot last year was Denny Hamlin versus Ross Chastain. The head-to-head is favoring Hamlin, is minus 145, and plus 110 for Ross Chastain. I think Hamlin more than likely edges Chastain, just kind of looking at some of the numbers. But Chastain, I mentioned, he made 4 of those optimals out of 6 of the drafting tracks last year. If I'm going head-to-head and I'm really wanting to play either a Hamlin or Chastain for that plus 110, I'm going Chastain, me personally, even though I know Hamlin has, they both have a legit shot to win this race, but obviously Hamlin's experience and how he approaches his things, not quite as aggressive usually, so he kind of stays out of trouble. But I think, for the money, getting plus odds, you throw 100 down, you're getting 110, plus your 100 back. That's really nice. And, you're only worried about one driver, and they're starting not too far from one another. So it's not like, Hamlin's starting third and then Chastain's starting 30th and he's got to do all this work. They're going to be kind of around each other. So that's going to be just a fun matchup to watch throughout the year. See if we see anything like last year stuff where they were getting into each other on a fairly regular basis. I hope so. I'm here about it. I want to see a nice little rivalry.
Yeah, it'd be fun. I think I'd lean a little bit towards Ross with the plus money on that. Even though Denny Hamlin is a super speedway megastar, he can really do some damage. It's just in the head-to-head, I see there's some value there because of, like you mentioned, there being very similar starting positions. If the race goes one way versus another, there's so many factors that play into it that I just lean that there's quite a bit more value associated with Ross Chastain in that scenario.
And I think what we just said could kind of be echoed for the next head-to-head we'll kind of briefly touch on. Austin Dillon versus Bubba Wallace. We are getting plus odds on Dillon. Now, they aren't starting as close as Chastain and Hamlin, but I think we're both kind of expecting Dillon to kind of be there towards the end. If he's, top 10, coming to 2 to 3 laps to go and Bubba's still in it, it's going to be tight. And Bubba probably gets that edge, but do I want to lay that minus 145 for Bubba, when I know that Dylan is right up there talent-wise on these style of tracks. I think I would lean Austin Dillon in that head-to-head. But it is tough. It is tough because Bubba, we talked about him already. He's stout.
He is. He really is. But I lean with the value in Austin Dillon on this one as well. I tend to see that with him being in a part of the conversation, you could even go take a stab at Austin Dillon at like plus 1,200 on the top Chevy. It's another category you could look at over there because I think Bubba Wallace is plus 375, so you're looking at even a greater amount of value associated with that one. So it would be interesting to see this head-to-head matchup. If it was just them two going at it for 500 miles, it'd be fun to watch. But this one right here, I'm leaning Dillon.
Is there any head-to-head questions in the chat, James?
Not at the moment.
Okay. All right. We're all caught up?
Yeah.
All right. So there's really not too much more that, I want to go over. I think we can talk a little bit about maybe some of our favorite bets to win. And when we make these picks, it's mostly based on the value because, Denny Hamlin's the favorite. Depending on which sports book you're at, you're probably getting them somewhere between 10-1 and 12-1. And hey, that's still nice money. But just given how chaotic this race can be, that makes it really tough for me to want to put something like that. And the favorites don't always win. Now, obviously, Hamlin has 3 of these, so he can certainly get a 4th. But, we saw Cindric. He didn't have great odds last year. I don't remember what they were off the top of my head. But this is the time to kind of take some stabs on guys that wouldn't typically finish top 5 or top 10, but that have really nice odds. For me, one of my favorite bets now, the lines have changed, so you may not get it exactly where I got it, but Truex, we saw him come out and he won the Clash. Joe Gibbs looked pretty good. He doesn't have the best super speedway numbers, but he did almost win this race a few years ago by like the closest margin ever, and just lost out by the closest margin in a 500. I got him early in the week at 33-1, and I think at most books now he's down to 25-1. But even a 25-1, just throwing a few bucks on it, he hits, man, you're going to be looking nice for the rest of the year. Where you can have some more money to play with. Or obviously, you can do whatever you want with it. But I like Truex here a lot. There are some more I want to kind of go over, but that's probably one of my favorite bets just because, I don't think a lot of people are expecting a whole lot out of him. And I think he can work out on DraftKings too. I just don't like him quite as much given where he's starting from. But just outright winner, I'll take Truex at 33-1. I'd take him at 25-1.
Yeah, I've got somebody that kind of in the same value range this week. I'm going with Austin Dillon. He's starting 27th, and he's very. We talked about him several times throughout the course of the show. How often he's in the conversation at the end in these super speedway settings. We're not always going to get the winner correct, but when we do see value like this on the previous winner, somebody that's consistently in the conversation, I kind of put him in the same kind of vein as Ryan Blaney in this style of track, and Blaney is one of those favorites that's 12-15-1. We're getting almost double that with Austin Dillon. He is starting further back, but mayhem could unfold and find himself right there at the end. And once again, I'm leaning on that 2,800 odds that I got him at earlier. That's my pick.
Let's just quickly go through a few more now. If you want to take some real long shots, but that have a legit upside to win given the equipment and just their talent, I think Allmendinger and Justin Haley at 50-1. Obviously, depending on where you're looking at, you might even get better odds at other books. I don't hate it. I mean, I wouldn't bet the house on it by any means, but man, you got a little extra money. 50-1, those guys are talented enough to do it. And then another guy, Zane Smith. We saw him race one race last year, and oh shoot, do you remember what track he raced at? I can't remember, but he filled in for Chris Buescher. was it a road course? No,
I can't recall.
I can't recall. I'd have to go back and look. Apologies, but he did really well. Like he had a top 20, and not many people were expecting that. And he ran good most of the day. You didn't hear much from him. He's won the truck race the last 2 years. And he's in that 36 car, and we've seen, not that this really matters, but David Reagan is usually in that car. And I think his approach is typically kind of hang back, let everyone wreck each other, and then I'll pass him. But, he's hitting top 10s. And right now, you can get Zane Smith at 100-1, and you can probably get him better odds at different sports books, so shop around. But if we're just taking long shots, we're just trying to throw something against the wall and see if it sticks, I think that's a nice way to go about it.
Yeah, that would be an option, and I think Corey LaJoie's got to be in that conversation too. He's great, this style of racing action. Somebody that was up there several times last year and just couldn't bring it home. So
I'd probably be looking him mostly at a top 10, top 5. Now you're not going to get as good
in that conversation.
Yeah, you're not going to get as good of odds, of course, like 80-1. But he was close at Atlanta, which is a drafting style track. He's with this car on this track, he's definitely in a position where he's more competitive, and you could kind of see some of that inexperience, in my opinion, last year when he'd get up front. He didn't quite know how to handle himself because most of the time he's running in the back because that's just what the car could do, not because of him. But now he's got some experience, and now he's going to have a little more confidence knowing that, hey, yeah, my car is capable of running up here. Let me do some more research on these guys. Let me analyze some of their moves and seeing what they're doing. So I don't hate it. I would definitely rather have LaJoie in a top 10, top 5 bet, which would still have nice odds. The win, if he wins and gets into the playoffs, not only is my playoff bracket busted, I think everyone's would be. No one's going to have him in there. But I would certainly love to see. I've been a fan of LaJoie for a while, and I'm real happy that he's in solid equipment. I think probably one of the last guys I really have as kind of a dart throw, not as good of an odds, but Ryan Preece. He's in that 41. Last year, Cole Custer was in the 41 and was not good at all. I'm sorry, there's just really no other way to put it. There could be a lot of factors for why he didn't run very well, but he got replaced. And Preece, who has been in the Cup Series, who has experience, set out a year, did a few other races in the lower series, but he looked good in the Clash. And there was some times, in the duels and whatnot, he was making some moves. So if he avoids the mayhem and he's running top 10, 2 laps to go, and he's got some forward help, like Briscoe and Amarola, who we've seen have shown speed, there's no reason why a Ryan Preece couldn't pull this out too. I'm seeing him at 33-1. I would imagine some books have probably got better odds on him. So that would be kind of a driver that I would throw out kind of as a long shot to win. Not as much in the DraftKings world, though.
Yeah, and I think somebody else that could be you could find some value with is a Chris Buescher, Brad Keselowski's teammate. He won one of the dual races last year. You can find a top 10 finish for him plus 200, so you can double your money with him finishing the top 10. That team seems to always come prepared and have speed at super speedways or drafting tracks. So I think that's a good way to find some additional value outside of the DraftKings platform.
Absolutely. James, have any more questions come through?
Yeah, they want to know, do you really see Jimmy Johnson doing anything today?
I hope so. I'd love to see it. I think that car it's going to be good. I mean, I expect Eric Jones and Noah Gragson to be a good car, and he's going to have a very similar car. The biggest concern would be that he doesn't have a race in the next-gen car. But in my opinion...
Under his belt already.
Yeah, under his belt. I mean, obviously, you got the duel, but that's not quite the same. He didn't run the Clash. So all these guys have a year's worth of races under their belt in this style of car, and he's been running IndyCar. But we saw him in IndyCar struggle a lot, but when it came to the ovals, he found himself up there more times than not. Now, would love to see it. I don't know if I would go that far. I don't think I'd feel comfortable enough actually placing a wager for him to win unless it was just, some fun money, whatever. But I think top 20 is certainly – I think it's, more likely than not that he finishes top 20. I think he's going to be smart about it. Obviously, he gets taken out in a wreck. That's just Daytona. But if we're looking from a DraftKings perspective, yeah, he's going to be highly owned, but there's a reason for it. And I do expect him to have a solid day.
Yeah, if he can stay out of the mess and the mayhem and everything that we are accustomed to seeing, there's plenty of caution laps, plenty of time for drivers that might go a lap down. If just whatever scenario plays out, I don't see him really.
He's also got Todd Gordon on the pit box, who used to be crew chief for Joey Logano a few years ago, and who won a championship with Logano. It's not like he just has no one on that pit box. I think they'll be making some good calls, and he kind of talked about it. I think it was after the dual race. They were asking like, how was it? And he was like, once the tires got up to temp, it kind of felt normal. And, he hasn't felt normal, I don't think, in a while with that Indy car. So, you give him a couple hundred laps or a couple hundred miles in this car, 50, 100 laps. I think he's going to figure out a good bit about this car. So if he avoids the wrecks, there's no reason why he can't get top 20, top 15, possibly even better.
And if he's finishing in the top 20, he's already over 5x value from
Easily.
A DraftKings perspective because he's starting 39th. So if you're looking at him from there, great. I'm sure there's several ways you can find value with Jimmy this week.
Yeah, you're probably not going to get the best value. Let me see if I can find any. You have the top 10s. Top 10, let's see. Jimmy Johnson, plus 220. Yeah, I don't know if I would lay that personally, just because 10th, that's tough. So it really just depends on how, what you mean by how does Jimmy do. I think he's great for DraftKings. If you're looking at some head-to-head bets, you might be able to find some good matchups there. So I expect a pretty solid day from Jimmy. Not expecting a win, but boy, that sure would be cool.
All right. Well, I think we've got almost everything covered. It's been fun to come to you live for the Great American Race at Daytona. This is something I've been excited for. We've finally got racing action for 38
weeks, basically.
Consecutive weeks, practically. So that's going to be a lot of stuff coming your way. Make sure you check out our website, losinggripodcast.com. We appreciate those of you that have subscribed and followed us, followed along. We're going to continue to bring a podcast to you weekly, so make sure that you check that out on all the major podcast platforms. We'll be putting out some clips here on YouTube, so if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for us. We would really appreciate it. Jeremy, do you have anything to add before we get out of here?
No, I think we've rambled and blabbed enough. I think it's time to go polish up our lineups, get them entered before, because we've only got a little bit of time left. So there's really nothing else for me to say except for thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe. We'll be doing this again soon. We'll plan out the next live stream and give you guys notice. So be looking out for that. Other than that, that's all I got, man.
Well, we appreciate everybody. James, thanks for running the show back behind the scenes for us and taking the questions.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for those of you that watched along and left us comments. It's always fun to be able to engage with you on this platform and all the other platforms that are available to us. But without further delay,
one thing, if you do have any questions before the start of the race, give us a message on Twitter. Hit us up on our Twitter, Losing Grip Pod, or whatever it is now.
It's Losing Grip Pod.
Yeah, Losing Grip Pod. So send us a DM there, and we can get your questions answered that way. But, yeah, that's all I got.
All right. Well, for the Losing Grip Podcast, I'm Joe, and that's Jeremy. We'll talk to you later.
Enjoy the race, y'all.